Why these 7 global choke points will break the world. The fragile arteries of global trade. Night falls over the Taiwan Strait, radar screens glowing in silent tension as a Chinese destroyer shadows a freighter. Thousands of miles away, ships bake under Panama's sun, each paying up to $4 million just to move through a canal too dry for comfort. Together, those two scenes define the world's new condition: warships on one side, drought on the other, both threatening the global bloodstream of trade. 7 narrow passages keep our world running. Each is barely a few dozen nautical miles across, yet together they move over 3/4 of everything traded worldwide: fuel, wheat, metals, microchips. A single ship, one conflict, or one failed season of rain can stall billions of lives and trillions of dollars. The Taiwan Strait alone carries nearly $7 trillion in goods every year, while Panama's shortfall can ripple inflation across continents. They are truly the arteries of modern civilization, and every year the pressure builds. Think about what happens when even one slows. The cost of food rises before it reaches your table. Factories run short on raw materials. Energy prices surge, and nations argue over who pays the difference. A storm, a strike, or skirmish in one spot can ripple across the entire planet. It's not theoretical. We've already seen it. One grounded vessel in the Suez Canal halted 12% of global trade for nearly a week. A drought in Panama has cut capacity almost in half, sending freight prices up by double digits. And every few months, the threat of war near Taiwan or Iran forces markets to tense up again. Each choke point has its own story, geography, politics, and climate, all weaving into a pattern of risk that no single nation can control. The Taiwan Strait holds the world's supply of advanced chips, yet sits between two hostile powers. The Strait of Hormuz funnels a third of the planet's oil through a gap no wider than 50 kilometers. The Bab-el-Mandeb, where the Red Sea narrows to a channel barely visible on a map, sits beside a war zone. Suez, the canal carved through desert, remains one accident away from paralysis. The Strait of Malacca hosts more cargo than any other passage on Earth, but is again stalked by pirates. Panama is drying out. The Arctic is thawing open. The pattern is clear. Our trade system runs through shrinking margins, physically and metaphorically. For decades, efficiency and profit carved paths narrower and faster until there was no slack left. Now climate change and conflict strain those paths more than ever. A drought can hit as hard as a blockade. A regional clash can reshape global prices within hours. The next great disruption might not come from human error, but from the natural limits we tried to ignore. So before any of these fragile arteries breaks, it's worth asking, how close are we already? To see the full picture, we'll trace them, one by one, from the flashpoint in East Asia to the frozen frontier of the Arctic. Because understanding where the world might fracture begins with the places that hold it together. The Taiwan Strait, one spark away. Dawn over the South China Sea glows pale blue, painting the waters between Taiwan and mainland China with deceptive calm. Ferries still run, cargo ships still line the horizon, and radar stations hum quietly on both shores. But beneath that calm lies the most precarious fault line in global trade, the Taiwan Strait, a channel barely 180 kilometers wide that carries almost $7 trillion in goods every year. Every 20 minutes, another container vessel crosses this narrow corridor. Oil tankers bound for Japan, semiconductor shipments headed for the United States, iron and coal feeding China's hungry ports. It all flows here, through a waterway that splits two incompatible worlds. On one side, Taiwan's democratic government warns of coercion and invasion. On the other, Beijing's leadership vows unification, by force if necessary. And caught between them are the world's most critical supply chains. To understand the stakes, you only need to look inside your phone or laptop. Nearly every advanced microchip was either designed, produced, or packaged with components passing through Taiwan or its nearby waters. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, sits less than 100 miles from the strait's edge. The company alone prints more than 90% of the world's most advanced chips, the invisible engines behind smartphones, cars, medical devices, satellites, and weapons systems. If shipping or production were even temporarily disrupted, entire industries would grind to a halt. But geography offers no protection. The strait's waters are shallow, open, and easily targetable. Chinese air patrols cross the median line almost daily, while Taiwanese fighters scramble to intercept. Naval training exercises now occur so frequently that they barely make headlines. Each maneuver, each mock blockade, sends investors and governments into quiet panic. Defense analysts game out scenarios where a single misread radar blip could trigger a confrontation. Imagine the sequence: a tense standoff, an accidental collision, a missile launched in confusion. Within hours, insurance premiums for East Asian shipping would skyrocket. Charter rates would double. Tankers bound for Japan and South Korea might reroute thousands of miles to safer waters through the Philippine Sea, adding weeks and millions in fuel costs. Semiconductor exports would stall, forcing factories from California to Berlin into emergency shutdowns. The result: markets in free fall, inflation soaring, and governments scrambling to stabilize an economic heartbeat they can't control. This is why the Taiwan Strait isn't just another maritime route. It's the global economy's nervous system. Every major economy on Earth has built invisible dependencies here. The cables resting on the seabed transmit a third of global internet traffic between Asia and the United States. The ships above those cables carry everything else. Lose both, and communication, production, and trade would fracture overnight. Yet diplomacy around the strait remains frozen. Beijing insists the waters are part of its territorial sea. The United States and its allies, citing international law, treat it as a global commons open to all. Each side stages freedom of navigation operations and large-scale military drills to enforce its view. Taiwan, meanwhile, tries to live between the two currents, upgrading coastal defenses while keeping trade routes open to maintain its lifeline to the world. The paradox is cruel. Taiwan's very independence, its success as a democratic, technological powerhouse, depends on global trade passing through waters China claims as its own. Every ship hauling Taiwanese goods also reminds Beijing of the island's self-sufficiency. Each transaction fuels both prosperity and tension. Behind closed doors, corporate leaders factor that tension into everything from semiconductor pricing to inventory strategy. Major chip buyers diversify production to South Korea, Japan, and the United States, but replication takes years and billions of dollars. Even with new fabrication plants under construction in Arizona and Dresden, they can't escape the fact that key materials, specialized machinery, and skilled labor still trace back to the island's network. The global supply web, once designed for efficiency, is now stretched across a geopolitical fault. And the military side of that equation only grows sharper. China's naval expansion has produced the world's largest battle fleet. Many of its ships routinely operate east of Taiwan, while anti-ship missile deployments on the mainland face the island like arrowheads. Taiwan, aware of the imbalance, invests in asymmetric defenses, mobile launchers, dispersed infrastructure, and civilian drills. Civilian ferries are quietly evaluated for potential use as military transports in wartime scenarios. Allied powers run exercises simulating the evacuation of citizens or the escort of merchant convoys. At the same time, cyber strikes and disinformation campaigns test digital systems tied to Taiwan's ports and corporations. It's conflict in slow motion, a rehearsal played at the edge of legality. But every rehearsal raises the possibility of a real performance. For traders and insurers, uncertainty is its own disaster. Even without any shots fired, fear alters behavior. Futures markets react to drills as if they were real events. A televised maneuver showing Chinese warships circling Taiwan's southern tip can drive oil prices up overnight. Economists call it the risk premium, the price of proximity to conflict. But that premium ultimately reaches consumers in the form of costlier energy, electronics, and food. What begins as tension somewhere east of Fujian becomes inflation halfway across the world. Still, the traffic continues. Crews navigating the strait describe a peculiar mix of normalcy and unease. Routes are planned meticulously, emergency drills are standard. Merchant captains track political news as closely as weather reports. The slightest change in radio tone from a naval base can trigger detours measured in hundreds of miles. It's like driving through a storm cloud that might be lightning or just mist, one shipmaster reportedly said. You don't know until it hits. The irony is that both sides have every reason to avoid that lightning. China depends on the very trade that flows through the same waters. Roughly 40% of its exports pass the island's east coast on their journey to markets in the US and Europe. A blockade or war would freeze its own economy as quickly as anyone else's. Taiwan, meanwhile, depends on that route to sell the chips that fund its defense. Mutual vulnerability should guarantee caution, yet history suggests it often does the opposite. International diplomacy circles around the problem but rarely touches it. Peaceful status quo has been the unsaid agreement for decades. No formal independence, no invasion, open trade. But as global rivalries sharpen and national identities harden, that tacit understanding feels thinner each year. The lines separating competition from confrontation blur, both on screen and on radar. Beyond politics, climate change adds another layer of risk. Typhoons sweeping across the region now grow stronger and less predictable. Port closures from extreme weather already delay shipments by days, sometimes weeks. As storm seasons expand, the navigable window for large container convoys narrows, turning the world's busiest strait into an even tighter schedule to manage. The intersection of natural and human volatility is unprecedented. Military tension meets meteorological chaos. For now, the engines keep running. Cargo cranes in Kaohsiung and Fuzhou lift containers day and night. Satellites watch over fleets moving like measured lines across a trembling sea. Every routine voyage feels miraculous precisely because it remains routine. One spark, political, mechanical, or accidental, could change that in an instant. A warning flare misread as a missile launch. A drone intercepted too aggressively. A blockade order issued before diplomacy catches up. In a world this interdependent, isolation no longer exists. A local crisis becomes a global event before ships can turn around. The Taiwan Strait stands as the first and most charged symbol of that truth, a place where the contest for sovereignty merges with the struggle for stability. Its waters look wide enough for all the ships that cross them, but in reality, there's barely enough room for error. And while the Pacific trembles at the risk of a blockade, further west lies another narrow passage, one that carries not microchips, but oil, and where a single explosion could freeze global energy overnight. The Strait of Hormuz, the oil pressure valve. Before sunrise, the narrow mouth between Iran and Oman already hums with tension. Tankers line up in careful formation, their hulls carrying the lifeblood of modern civilization, oil. From above, the Strait of Hormuz looks deceptively simple, a blue ribbon, 50 kilometers across at its tightest point. But this isn't just water. It's the most valuable corridor on Earth. 20 million barrels of crude move through here every single day, nearly 1/5 of all oil consumed globally. A single choke point controls the energy supply for billions. If it closes, fuel prices spike worldwide before the first ships even turn back, which means every flicker of tension here instantly pulses through global markets. In early 2025, when Israel and Iran exchanged threats across proxy wars, oil prices jumped 13% in a week. No blockade, no missile strike, just fear. For traders and politicians, that fear is almost tangible. It's the sound of radar pings, encrypted radio chatter, and the low-frequency hum of engines moving through what could become a battlefield overnight. Geographically, the strait is wedged between coasts that read like opposing chapters in a history of suspicion. To the north sits Iran, its coastal batteries lined with anti-ship missiles, Revolutionary Guard patrol boats darting between merchant tankers, broadcasting short-range warnings. To the south, Oman hosts Western naval observation posts. Farther out, American and British warships keep constant watch, escorting convoys and scanning the horizon. At any given moment, there might be more military presence than commercial. Oil moves because everyone knows the alternative. Closing the strait would choke Iran's own exports as much as anyone else's. Yet throughout history, the threat alone has served as leverage. In 1984, the tanker war phase of the Iran-Iraq conflict saw hundreds of attacks on ships. Mines drifted unseen in the current. Decades later, those memories still shape military doctrine. The U.S. Fifth Fleet remains stationed nearby precisely because reopening a blocked Hormuz would be impossible without it. Modern security depends less on treaties and more on geometry. Every tanker leaving the Persian Gulf must squeeze between two narrow shipping lanes, barely 3 kilometers apart, separated by shallow reefs. One disabled ship or one missile could easily seal an entire lane. Naval strategists call it killbox territory, where space constrains movement so completely that even a small incident cascades instantly. Economically, that constraint defines global vulnerability. The world consumes roughly 100 million barrels of oil a day. 1 in 5 passes between these headlands. If traffic stopped, the shortfall would reach 20 million barrels daily. Analysts estimate prices could surge toward $130 per barrel, levels high enough to trigger recession conditions across energy-importing nations. Yes, alternative pipelines exist: the Saudi east-west route to the Red Sea, the UAE's overland pipe to Fujairah, but combined they can divert only a fraction of the lost flow, not enough to calm markets. Energy networks built for efficiency now reveal their weakness: no slack, no backup. For mariners, navigating Hormuz is unlike any other crossing. Ships must follow a narrow traffic separation scheme marked by GPS coordinates rather than buoys, because currents and visibility shift constantly with sandstorms and heat haze. Bridge crews maintain radio silence to avoid interference or misinterpretation. A single alarm in the middle of the night can trigger evasive maneuvers. One officer described the feeling as like steering through an invisible minefield, except the mines can hear you. Meanwhile, the politics above the waterline simmer. Iran's leadership views foreign patrols as provocation. The US frames them as deterrence. After every confrontation, an intercepted drone, a seized vessel, a near miss, the pattern repeats: temporary escalation, diplomatic silence, and rising energy premiums. Investors don't wait for explosions to react. The rumor of a blockade is enough. This psychological fragility shapes the global economy as much as the physical chokepoint itself. Stock markets in Tokyo and New York drift, with naval alerts issued thousands of miles away. Airlines hedge fuel costs preemptively. Governments release strategic petroleum reserves just to calm headlines. The Strait of Hormuz has become not only an artery, but a barometer, measuring the pressure of geopolitical fear. Consider how the system behaves under stress. When tension peaked in early 2025, ship insurers reclassified routes within 100 nautical miles as war risk zones. That raised insurance categories, adding millions in premiums per voyage. Some carriers rerouted around the Arabian Peninsula entirely, increasing travel times by 10 days. Cumulative effects rippled through industries dependent on steady shipping cycles: manufacturing, logistics, and agriculture. The price of plastics, fertilizers, and transporting grains all climbed because the fuel to move them became more expensive. In this feedback loop, perception equals impact. Every statement from Tehran or Washington, each photo of missile drills or carrier formations, functions like a market signal. Traders interpret language as movement. Deploying defensive assets sounds reassuring until someone adds, in response to credible threats. Then futures tick upward instantly. Fear turns into numbers, and numbers into cost of living. But beneath everything flows the simple physics of dependency. Oil extracted from Saudi fields, Kuwaiti rigs, or Qatari platforms can't reach global markets without crossing these waters. Europe depends on LNG shipments transiting the same path. East Asia relies on them even more. Gas from Qatar lights much of Japan and South Korea, heats homes in Taiwan, and powers critical factories in China. Close Hormuz, and millions experience blackouts within weeks. For Iran, the strait also represents paradox. The nation's economic survival depends on exports passing freely through a corridor it often uses as political leverage. By threatening to close it, Iran risks its own revenues, an act of deterrence by self-endangerment. It's a geopolitical version of mutual assured disruption. Both sides lose if anyone acts. That tension occasionally boils over in smaller confrontations. Detained tankers, cyber interference with navigation systems, shadowing by drones, all reminders that control here isn't absolute. What's remarkable is not how often incidents occur, but how rarely they escalate. Each day without conflict is a quiet triumph of restraint, invisible to headlines but vital to stability. The broader picture reaches beyond regional rivalry. Every nation that depends on oil, effectively all of them, has a stake. China imports nearly 4 million barrels daily through Hormuz, India even more relative to its population. Europe's refineries process Gulf crude constantly. The globalized system ties them together in a form of shared vulnerability unprecedented in history. Climate policy debates often overshadow this fact. The world's transition to renewable energy is real but slow. As of 2025, petroleum remains the foundation of modern transport, agriculture, and manufacturing. Until alternatives scale massively, any disruption in Hormuz presses directly against economic stability. Ironically, climate change itself threatens that stability further. Rising sea temperatures and stronger monsoon shifts affect navigation safety and coastal infrastructure on both sides of the bottleneck. Within the strait, environmental risks compound. Oil leaks from even minor collisions could cause catastrophic damage in semi-enclosed waters, destroying marine habitats that sustain local fishing communities. Yet cleanup and containment capacities are minimal compared to shipping intensity. The same geography that makes Hormuz vital also makes it fragile. Narrow channels and strong currents can carry pollution across borders in hours. Militarization shows no sign of easing. The US maintains surveillance drones overhead almost continually. Iran tests new missile systems along its coast, claiming deterrence. Gulf allies invest billions in missile defense and fast response fleets. Meanwhile, private tankers quietly install non-lethal protection, acoustic deterrents, or signal jammers to ward off interference. It's an arms race conducted under the banner of precaution. Among mariners, a fatalistic joke circulates: every ship through Hormuz sails insured by hope. They mean it literally and figuratively. Hope that no radar lock is misread. Hope that diplomacy holds another day. Hope that politics remains predictable long enough for the conv to reach open sea. Yet hope can't change math. 2 narrow lanes, 20 million barrels, 7 billion beneficiaries. The margin for error remains microscopic. Even partial disruptions, say mines laid at channel entrances or a temporary closure due to confrontation, would ripple across continents. Energy importing nations already calculate emergency ration scenarios. Economists model knock-on effects: inflation spikes, currency devaluation, potentially unrest. Behind those numbers lies a quieter truth. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a piece of geography. It's a pressure valve for an energy-hungry civilization. Every decision taken here compresses that pressure a little further. Warships circle, diplomats negotiate, tankers proceed, all aware that one spark, mechanical failure, deliberate act, or misunderstanding could release the stored tension in seconds. For now, trade continues, oil flows, and headlines alternate between alarm and relief. But beneath that surface, every barrel exported carries with it a measure of anxiety. At the world's most strategic bottleneck, peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the narrow gap through which modern life still squeezes. And while those shipments keep moving, barely, the turmoil spreading across the Red Sea has already lit the fuse at the next chokepoint, where commerce and conflict now share the same horizon. The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, where conflict meets commerce. By dawn, the waters off Yemen look deceptively quiet. On radar screens aboard passing container ships, the narrow blue stretch between Djibouti and the Arabian Peninsula appears no more threatening than any other corridor. But sailors know better. Beneath that calm moves one of the most dangerous trade routes on Earth, the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, the Gate of Tears. It's where the Red Sea narrows to a choke barely 30 kilometers wide, linking Europe to Asia through the Suez Canal. Every day, tankers and freighters worth billions pass within missile range of an active war zone. Over 17,000 vessels use this passage each year, carrying millions of barrels of oil and much of the cargo that keeps Europe running. For the crews on board, it's not abstract geopolitics, it's a daily hazard measured in watch rotations and silent prayers. They transit at night, blackout curtains drawn, deck lights dimmed. Conversations on the bridge are clipped and rehearsed. Every ripple on radar could be a fishing skiff or something else. Since 2023, the region's civil conflict has spilled outward to these waters. Houthi forces, aligned with Iranian interests, began targeting commercial ships they accused of aiding their adversaries. Missiles, drones, and sea mines entered the equation. International navies rushed in American destroyers, British frigates, French and Indian escorts, forming a patchwork defense network. But even coordinated protection can't erase the fear felt when a radar alarm goes off in the dark. When a Liberian-flagged oil tanker was struck by a drone in early 2024, global oil markets reacted within hours. Insurance rates for Red Sea shipping soared 300%. Several carriers, including major European operators, stopped using the route entirely, forcing vessels to detour around the Cape of Good Hope, a 3-week-longer journey that cost millions in extra fuel. The strike didn't just scar a single hull, it rippled through every supply chain connected to it. And those chains stretch astonishingly wide. Roughly 12% of all global trade flows through the Red Sea corridor. A single day's disruption here can slow manufacturing in Europe, delay electronics in Asia, and alter the price of grain in Africa. In other words, the Bab-el-Mandeb doesn't just connect oceans, it connects livelihoods. For local fishermen in Yemen and Eritrea, the conflict has made the sea dangerous in entirely new ways. Naval blockades, restricted zones, and floating debris from past attacks have ruined traditional routes. Some coastal towns now face food shortages because supply barges won't risk docking. As tragedies mount, humanitarian aid itself competes with commercial freight for safe convoy slots. Trade and survival have merged into one perilous flow. Meanwhile, the fight for control of the strait has multiplied the players onshore. Saudi Arabia patrols the northern reaches with coalition allies. The United Arab Emirates maintains a presence on Yemen's Socotra archipelago. The United States and its partners conduct aerial surveillance from bases in Djibouti, watching for missile launches or suspicious heat signatures. Each new actor promises protection, but also brings overlapping rules of engagement, increasing the risk that one mistaken radar reading could ignite a wider conflict. The paradox is striking. The Bab-el-Mandeb's strategic importance demands intense security, but that very security breeds tension. Even small incidents become international. When a cargo vessel reported near misses from a projectile, debates flared between navies over whose waters the attack had crossed. Within hours, markets in London and Singapore readjusted shipping rates as insurers recalibrated risk for the entire region. Fear became a tradable commodity. For the mariners who still pass through, protocols have grown almost ritualistic. Ships radio the multinational task force before entering the area, follow designated transit corridors, and post armed guards on deck. Many captains shut off their automatic identification systems to hide from potential attackers, even though that makes collision avoidance harder. The irony isn't lost on them. Invisibility keeps them safe and makes them vulnerable at the same time. When large convoys form, a rare sense of uneasy solidarity takes hold. Crews can see each other's navigation lights flickering on the horizon, each vessel relying on the other's presence as makeshift security. They move together at reduced speed, silent, knowing that beyond the calm surface wait shore launchers, drones, and the unpredictable winds of war. For global logistics companies, these conditions force rerouted flows that echo deep into supply chains. Shipping giants now coordinate with naval intelligence briefings before charting schedules. Cargo once moving through the Red Sea to Europe now detours through southern Africa, adding cost and unpredictability. Those extended routes, in turn, increase congestion at different choke points. The Suez Canal slows when Bab-el-Mandeb falters, the Cape routes strain when Suez jams. Each crisis travels downstream to the next obstacle. This interdependency makes every decision critical. When US and European forces launched defensive strikes in late 2024 to neutralize missile launch sites in Yemen, commodity markets reacted faster than diplomats. Crude prices spiked 5% overnight. It wasn't about immediate damage, it was about confidence. If seafarers lose confidence, routes die. If routes die, economies wobble. The line between deterrence and disruption is razor thin. Journalists sometimes describe Bab-el-Mandeb as where the war meets the world. It's accurate in the bluntest sense. It's the front line of globalization. Container ships carrying sneakers, laptops, and power tools share the sky with fighter jets and drones. The The same satellites that track weather patterns also watch for missile trails. Logistics coordinators plan voyages alongside military analysts. Civilian and combat charts overlap. And yet, despite constant peril, trade hasn't stopped. It adapts. There's always someone willing to sail. Crews sign on with bonus pay. Shipowners gamble on higher freight rates to offset the danger. Risk becomes part of the business model, normalized like storms or mechanical breakdowns. The world keeps accepting it because the alternative, shortages and inflation, is worse. Still, beneath the arithmetic of risk lies a human fear that never disappears. Mariners speak of sudden bright flashes on the horizon, quick enough to question whether they imagined it. They talk of radio silence after a companion vessel vanishes from radar, only later to hear it limped away burned but afloat. The fear isn't cinematic. It's steady, cumulative, exhausting. And it's the true cost of keeping supply chains open through conflict zones. Satellite photographs of the coast show a clutter of wrecks, some recent, some rusting relics of decades past. The sea here keeps its history close. Every ship that sinks becomes another layer in this narrow graveyard of global commerce. And still, just above those ruins, the next convoy passes. Politically, the strait has become leverage in every negotiation touching the Middle East. Peace talks in Yemen stall, and instantly insurance markets edge upward. Iran's influence expands, and regional rivals react with new naval drills. Western governments invest in anti-drone technology while exploring alternative trade routes. But alternatives offer time, not solutions. Even if ships reroute, pipelines and roads can't replicate the sheer volume that crosses this channel daily. And this is where the deeper risk lies. If instability continues, shipping companies will gradually rewire trade geography, shifting suppliers, ports, and even currencies. Such shifts erode trust in established global routes, rewriting the map through economics rather than diplomacy. The Bab-el-Mandeb wouldn't disappear. It would simply become another frontier of unpredictability. For now, though, it remains indispensable. Every container that passes becomes proof that vulnerabilities can coexist with momentum. Each successful transit is reassurance that chaos hasn't yet won. The Red Sea glimmers with sunlight, the surface polished and indifferent, while governments debate and sailors navigate their luck mile by mile. In quieter moments, some describe the feeling as surreal, guiding a 100,000-ton vessel through a corridor nicknamed the Gate of Tears, aware that every knot forward threads between war and necessity. It's not heroism that drives them, just obligation, to cargo, to contracts, to the rhythm of a world that refuses to slow down. The Bab-el-Mandeb is where commerce learns humility. It shows how thin the border between normal and crisis truly is. Behind each container, stacked neatly on a deck, lies not only goods, but the fragile agreement that allows civilization to function. And each successful voyage north through this gauntlet ends not with relief, but with another challenge ahead. Because barely 1,000 miles beyond, every ship emerging from these waters aims for a man-made ribbon through the desert, one miracle of engineering under its own growing strain. The Suez Canal, the human-made lifeline. At noon, the desert shimmers like a mirage. A procession of ships cuts silently through a line of water carved into sand, the Suez Canal, that improbable thread linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. From above, it looks too narrow, a single stroke connecting continents. Yet through this stroke flows nearly 12% of all global trade. Every year, more than 20,000 vessels transit, carrying everything from crude oil to coffee beans. Nothing about this route should work as smoothly as it does, and increasingly, it doesn't. The canal's geography seems straightforward, 193 kilometers long, only a couple hundred meters wide, and almost straight. But simplicity masks fragility. There's no alternative track beside it, no parallel route to fall back on. When a ship enters from Port Suez in the south or Port Said in the north, it commits to a single-file journey lasting up to 12 hours, with little room for maneuver. Hundreds of millions of dollars in cargo inch through a desert that can change mood with a sandstorm. Historically, the canal has been a triumph of engineering and geopolitics. When it opened in 1869, it shortened the voyage from Europe to Asia by over 4,000 miles, redefining global commerce overnight. Britain's empire thrived on its control. Later, Egypt reclaimed it as a symbol of sovereignty. Wars have been fought on its banks, but none disrupted the world as swiftly as a more mundane event: a single blocked container ship in 2021. The Ever Given incident reminded everyone how thin the buffer truly is. In the spring of that year, the massive vessel lodged itself across the channel for 6 days. $90 billion in trade froze. Hundreds of ships circled at anchor. Factories from Finland to Mumbai waited for delayed components. The global supply chain had never looked so literal: one stuck ship visible from orbit, holding up the world. Even after the blockage cleared, the ripple effects lasted months. Freight rates climbed, queues at ports spiraled, and logistics planners learned 3 painful words: no redundancy left. Since then, the Suez Canal Authority has upgraded the southern channels, promised wider turnouts, and deepened sections to handle heavier drafts. But improvement can't outrun physics or politics. Egypt depends on canal tolls for hard currency, over $9 billion in 2024 alone, so closure or slowdown has national consequences. Yet expansion also brings costs: dredging, salinity intrusion into farmland, and constant maintenance against shifting sands. Every meter deepened invites more environmental strain. Then there's the matter of sheer congestion. As global shipping volumes rebound after pandemic-era disruptions, traffic through Suez now surpasses pre-2002 levels. Fleet sizes are growing faster than infrastructure. The latest generation of megaships, each over 400 meters long, fits through with only 2 to 3 meters of clearance on either side. Tugs guide them with precision, but one gust of desert wind can still push disaster back into view. Captains call this transit threading the needle, a phrase that sounds thrilling until you realize how literally they mean it. Operationally, the journey through Suez demands endurance. Ships enter convoys that move northbound and southbound on strict schedules. There's no overtaking. Speeds remain slow to avoid wash against canal sides. Bridge officers describe hours of silent concentration, watching mirages shimmer over sand embankments. During sandstorms, visibility can drop to a few hundred meters, a ship vanishing into haze while radar flickers under dust static. When conditions worsen, controllers halt movement entirely, stacking hundreds of vessels in waiting bays. Every delay costs millions in fuel, charter time, and cargo penalties. And delays are rising. Climate change is reshaping the region's weather patterns. Egypt's summers now bring longer heat waves and higher evaporation rates, reducing water depth in some sections. Extreme winds occur more frequently, and dense fog occasionally blankets the northern approaches. The canal's maintenance systems were never designed for rapid climate swings. Engineers constantly dredge sediment carried by altered currents, fighting to keep the passage navigable. As meteorological volatility grows, the once predictable desert becomes unpredictably alive. Political stability adds another layer of uncertainty. Egypt's economy relies heavily on foreign investment and tourism, both sensitive to unrest. A brief period of protests or policy shifts can scare insurers enough to raise risk premiums overnight. Naval patrols guard the approaches against piracy from the Red Sea, but internal challenges, from currency crises to regional tensions, still cast shadows over canal operations. Officials downplay vulnerabilities, but shippers remember history. When the canal closed during the 1967 war, the global fleet spent 8 years sailing the long way around Africa. Yet despite every challenge, the canal endures. It's too critical to fail, but also too fragile to ever seem stable. Pilots who guide ships through its locks compare it to walking a tightrope while balancing entire economies on their shoulders. Every maneuver blends tradition and technology, radar charts, tug coordination, and human instinct honed over hundreds of passages. They operate with calm precision, aware that the world's patience would evaporate with a single mistake. In recent years, the Suez Canal Authority has tried revamping image and efficiency. A second channel in the southern section, completed in 2015, was hailed as a new Suez. It allows limited two-way traffic, reducing delays slightly, but projected growth quickly outpaced those benefits. The 2024 fiscal reports show toll revenues rising mainly because of increased fees, not faster movement. Faster, it turns out, isn't possible when every vessel must still queue through a bottleneck defined by geography itself. Behind the statistics lies a subtler transformation. The canal has become both a trade route and a climate experiment. Its saltwater intrusion affects ecosystems stretching deep into the Nile Delta. Migratory species from the Red Sea now drift into the Mediterranean, altering fish stocks and regional fisheries. The same passage that united trade routes also merged two seas that nature had kept apart for millennia. This environmental crossover rarely features in shipping forecasts, but its long-term ramifications are immense. Then there's the relentless pressure of ambition. Egypt's government sees Suez as a linchpin for national pride, a signal that the country still commands relevance in global logistics. Ambitious projects line its banks, industrial zones, new cities, and refueling centers. Yet international investors watch nervously, knowing regional stability is never guaranteed. A single political misstep could freeze expansion or trigger capital flight. The canal mirrors humanity's dilemma perfectly: visible progress built on invisible risk. Sailors who have crossed Suez often describe a strange sense of duality, awe at the precision of human achievement, tension at the awareness of its limits. They pass desert villages where children wave from under power lines, then glimpse tank tracks etched into sand from old wars. The past and present blend. Generations have depended on this artificial river, and every ship that passes testifies to how thoroughly we've tied our fate to geography we reshaped ourselves. At dusk, as the last convoy enters the Mediterranean, the horizon gleams with orange and dust. Engines drone at low throttle, long shadows stretching along tranquil banks. It's easy at that moment to believe the system works perfectly, that human design has tamed the desert. But each transit balances on a knife-edge engineering triumph, political bet, climatic gamble. The canal's quiet surface conceals a question that grows louder each year. How long can perfection operate without failure becoming inevitable? Because all it takes is a stuck ship, a storm surge, or unrest upriver, and the miracle stutters again. When Suez slows, Asia pivots south toward a corridor even narrower, more crowded, and no less precarious. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow corridor of Asia. Under the grey dawn haze, the sea between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore hums like a highway. Thousands of vessels crawl through one of the narrowest and busiest stretches of water on Earth, the Strait of Malacca. At its tightest, it's only 2.5 kilometers wide. Yet every year, nearly 90,000 merchant ships squeeze through, carrying around 60% of global maritime trade. Oil for China, coal for India, manufactured goods for Europe, all funnel through this narrow corridor linking the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It's the vein that keeps Asia alive. Inside a crowded shipping lane, there's no room for error. Tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, and fishing boats cross within visual range, horns echoing over humid air. The crew of a bulk carrier heading for Shanghai can see the silhouettes of tankers looming on every horizon. Radar screens are dense with motion. Pilots track speed and bearing in micro-adjustments measured by degrees and seconds. The pressure is constant. One mechanical failure, one wrong maneuver, and traffic jams ripple from Singapore to the South China Sea. But in 2025, physical congestion isn't the only threat. Piracy, long thought subdued, has returned. During the first half of the year alone, officials recorded 80 attacks and robberies in the Strait of Malacca and the nearby Singapore Strait, nearly 4 times more than in 2024. Most involve small gangs boarding slow-moving vessels at night, stealing engine parts, valuables, or fuel. It's rarely violent, but it's relentless. The resurgence stunned shipping companies that had considered the region's piracy problem solved a decade ago. The reasons are as narrow and tangled as the strait itself. With conflict heating up in the Red Sea, hundreds of ships diverted their routes through Southeast Asia, crowding these channels beyond capacity. More targets mean more opportunity for local crime networks, many operating from Indonesia's Riau Islands, where unemployment and poverty have worsened. Small boats dart from hidden coves, using the very geography that frustrates naval patrols: jagged coasts, muddy estuaries, and islets scattered like camouflage. For them, a night's theft can equal a month's income. Mariners describe the atmosphere as tense but oddly routine. They dim decks, double lock hatches, and post extra lookouts on stern watch. Captains keep AIS transmissions restricted to avoid broadcasting position data that pirates might exploit. On radar, the boundary between fishing vessel and potential threat blurs. Every echo triggers calculation. Ignore it and risk ambush. React too soon and invite collision in the world's busiest choke point. It's a balance of intuition and fatigue. Regional governments respond with patrols, but cooperation has limits. Singapore maintains modern surveillance operations and swift response craft. Malaysia stations armed officers along key routes. Indonesia, responsible for the largest stretch of coast, grapples with logistical shortages, vast waters, few ships, uneven budgets. Together, these nations maintain the Malacca Straits Patrol Program, a multinational effort dating back to 2004. It once nearly eradicated piracy here, proving that collaboration worked. But nearly 2 decades later, coordination faces strain as economic hardship returns and global attention shifts elsewhere. Singapore argues that international partners, perhaps Japan, India, or the United States, should expand assistance through joint patrols and technology sharing. Indonesia resists foreign presence on its waters, citing sovereignty. The result is a compromise that pleases none: enough patrols to chase pirates, not enough to deter them completely. Each state guards its jurisdiction like a boundary made of pride, even as thieves slip between invisible lines. For insurers, the equation is simple but costly. More incidents mean higher premiums. By mid-2025, risk surcharges for transiting Malacca doubled compared to the previous year. Some operators rerouted through the Lombok Strait farther east, adding days of sailing to avoid exposure. But traffic there is rising too, and shallow reefs make passage difficult for the largest ships. Avoidance only shifts pressure, never removes it. Within maritime circles, the psychology of fear spreads faster than statistics. A single hijacking or theft story circulates on WhatsApp groups used by sailors worldwide, inflating perception of danger beyond the numbers. It's like ghosts on the radar, one captain told reporters. Maybe nothing's there, but you steer away anyway. For crews running multi-week routes, that constant caution breeds exhaustion as real as the threat itself. The human factor looms large in this resurgence. Many pirates aren't hardened criminals, but displaced fishermen driven by dwindling catches and poor prospects. Years of overfishing and economic shocks push them toward quick rewards from passing ships. Governments know the cure lies not only in patrols, but in poverty reduction, jobs that make piracy less tempting than risk. But long-term solutions require budgets as complex as regional politics, and those remain uncertain. Meanwhile, shipowners adapt. New vessels come fitted with higher deck railings, motion-sensing floodlights, and lockable citadels, where crew can shelter if boarded. Some companies install real-time surveillance connected via satellite to command centers thousands of kilometers away. It's an arms race measured in deterrence rather than firepower. Pirates scale their risk, industry scales its countermeasures, the cycle repeats. For all the heightened alarms, these attacks rarely capture news attention beyond specialist reports. There are no spectacular explosions, no dramatic rescues, just thefts of tools, fuel siphoning, and crews shaken but alive. Yet economically, even minor disruptions compound. Average speeds through the strait decrease as ships add extra watches. Combined with detours from the Red Sea, this slowdown has subtly inflated shipping costs across Asia. Container rates from Singapore to Japan are up by double digits. Those pennies accumulate into billions across global pricing chains. The Strait of Malacca has always been geography's paradox, a shortcut that tests patience. Ancient traders called it the Maritime Silk Road, an artery vital to empires. Today, its modern globalization condensed to its purest form, efficiency without margin. Every commodity you can name, oil, grain, tin, electronics, flows here. Any closure would reverberate across continents. Beyond theft, the strait faces environmental and logistical strain. Dense traffic leaves trails of exhaust that cloud shallow coastal ecosystems. Oil leaks from minor collisions poison mangroves on Sumatra's edge. Rapid port expansion around Singapore and Port Klang intensifies sedimentation, altering currents and navigation depths. Climate change adds another difficulty. Monsoons grow erratic, with unpredictable squalls forcing temporary lane closures. heat waves stress machinery and crews. The corridor's fragility mirrors its economic role, essential yet overused. While the risks multiply, demand never slows. By 2003, analysts predict freight volume here could double, driven by Asian manufacturing growth. Infrastructure upgrades lag behind projection. New monitoring satellites and drone patrol plans promise efficiency, but raise questions about intrusion and data sharing. How do nations guard sovereignty while sharing surveillance essential for safety? Nobody agrees, but ships keep moving, proof that commerce often precedes consensus. Crew members finishing their Malacca runs speak of a strange relief mixed with fatigue. Some say the narrowest segment, the Phillips Channel, feels like sailing through a keyhole. On both sides, dense city lights shimmer, reminders that billions of lives depend on these few miles of seawater staying open. Passing safely feels like luck disguised as routine. Economists watching from afar see more than maritime drama, they see a signal. Congestion in Malacca means global demand remains high, yet vulnerabilities deepen. When piracy returned in 2025, it wasn't just local criminals taking advantage of chaos. It was the world's trade system showing symptoms of strain elsewhere. Disruptions in the Red Sea displaced ships here. Drought in Panama redirected Atlantic traffic back toward Asia. Instability behaves like water. When one line blocks, pressure finds another. The Strait of Malacca is where that pressure concentrates. By mid-year, cooperative naval drills intensified. Singaporean and Malaysian patrol boats maneuver together under watchful eyes of global media. Official statements assure stability, but the underlying truth remains: no single nation controls this corridor anymore. The strait belongs to everyone who needs it, and no one who can guarantee its safety. At sunset, silhouettes of tankers glint against crimson haze, navigation lights flickering in humid air. The congestion looks almost beautiful from a distance, a ballet of precision and endurance. But every captain knows beauty here is born of tension. Each voyage proves that globalization still functions, just barely. Ships escaping one crisis find another, one shaped not by ideology or weather, but by human limits. In this 2-kilometer-wide channel, the line between stability and breakdown narrows to meters and minutes. And beyond these waters lies a different kind of constraint, not piracy, not conflict, but the raw reach of nature itself, where rain no longer falls on schedule and a canal built to unite oceans begins to run dry. The Panama Canal, drying arteries of the Americas. The water looks calm, but every centimeter counts. Beneath a punishing tropical sun, ships that once glided through Panama now wait for clearance that may not come for days. On satellite images, Gatun Lake, the artificial heart that feeds the canal's locks, shows widening beaches where there should be deep channels. The drought that began 2 years ago hasn't truly ended. It's only paused between warnings. What used to be routine transit has turned into a gamble with nature. For over a century, the Panama Canal has been the Western Hemisphere's shortcut between oceans, a human-made corridor that rearranged global geography. 40 ships a day once crossed here, condensing journeys of nearly 10,000 miles into a few dozen. In 2025, that rhythm is broken. Record low rainfall forced the Panama Canal Authority to cut transits by almost half, from around 40 vessels daily to barely 22. Some mornings, the waiting line of ships stretches deep into both oceans, engines idling, burning millions of dollars in fuel just to hold position. This isn't a temporary inconvenience. Every passage through the canal consumes millions of gallons of freshwater from Gatun Lake, water released into the sea and lost forever. When the sky refuses to replenish it, the locks slow to a crawl. During the worst months of 2024, October rainfall was down 43%, so low that water levels approached the all-time record set in the 195s. Tankers carrying liquefied petroleum gas that once slipped through effortlessly now risk scraping draft limits. The largest vessels, Neo-Panamax-class giants built specifically for the canal's modern expansion, sit anchored offshore, unable to meet depth requirements. Onshore, the logistics landscape bends under pressure. The canal's typical traffic supports nearly 8% of global sea freight and 40% of U.S. container trade. Those numbers make every bottleneck matter. Companies that depend on predictable delivery cycles, automakers, agribusinesses, medical distributors, scramble to recalculate schedules. When water levels fall, they reroute through the Cape of Good Hope or the Suez Canal, adding tens of days and millions in costs. The irony is painful. Drought in the Americas means congestion halfway across the world. Freight rates mirror that anxiety. During the height of the crisis, carriers paid premiums of up to $4 million to jump the queue, a silent auction for water space. Even as rainfall improved under mild La Niña in early 2025, rates remained 20 to 40% above pre-drought norms. Energy shipments suffer the hardest hit. The Houston-Chiba route for liquefied gas reached record highs, pushing ripple inflation through industries dependent on cheap transport. Economists estimate that a single month of canal restrictions can trim several tenths of a percent off global trade volume. For the crews trapped in the backlog, the situation is surreal. They can see the locks from deck, but can't move. Each sunrise brings rumors of rainfall reports and possible slot openings. Some captains describe the daily routine like waiting for a tide that no longer obeys the moon. Food supplies dwindle, spare parts run low. The canal's nearby harbors teem with vessels seeking maintenance while their cargo sits idle. It's a scene resembling an industrial drought as much as an environmental one. Panama Canal Authority faces an impossible arithmetic, balancing limited water against global demand. To preserve lake levels, engineers implement draft restrictions. Ships must ride no deeper than imposed limits, meaning reduced cargo or none at all. For some operators, half-empty transit is better than none. For others, it's financial suicide. Every adjustment ripples outward to freight planners, insurance firms, and even grocery suppliers awaiting containers far across the ocean. Long-term solutions exist, just not yet. Plans for a new reservoir on the Rio Indio River promise a 15-ship-per-day increase in dry seasons, but completion could take until 203. The projected cost sits near $1.6 billion, and environmental studies drag on as communities protest possible displacement. Other options, recycling locked water or building desalination facilities, offer only partial relief. The canal was designed for a climate that no longer exists, and adaptation is proving slower than change itself. Panama's government walks a diplomatic tightrope. The canal's revenue, billions in annual tolls, anchors national income. Closing it, even briefly, would devastate budgets and local employment. Yet the government also faces international scrutiny: how to preserve water for citizens without sacrificing trade lifelines. The drought forced rationing not only for shipping, but for domestic supply. Some districts near Panama City experienced restrictions as freshwater reserves dwindled. The same infrastructure that serves world commerce also sustains households. From space, the contrast is striking. Surrounding rainforests shimmer green after sporadic storms, but the central lakes remain pale, their shorelines drawn inward like retreating veins. Climate scientists warn that such low-water events will repeat with increasing frequency in coming decades as global temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift. By mid-century, some models suggest Panama could face seasonal shipping interruptions as routine rather than crisis. What used to be a once-in-a-generation drought might occur every 5 years. That possibility reshapes trade planning. Logistics companies now incorporate hydrological forecasts into pricing models, studying rainfall probabilities as closely as fuel costs. Investors assess climate risk premiums on shipping routes, financial acknowledgement that water scarcity equals productivity loss. The canal becomes less a steady gateway and more an occasionally open door. Sailors accustomed to tropical deluges grapple with the new normal. Rain squalls that used to flood decks now vanish within minutes. Heat waves dry the air until mirages ripple over the locks. The technology running the canal, floodgates, tugboats, hydraulic systems, was engineered for abundant water and predictability. Under stress, maintenance cycles shorten, repairs drag. When locks close early each evening to conserve supply, the silence over the channels feels unnatural. Locals call it the sound of thirst. Yet amid the disruption, adaptation unfolds. Freight firms experiment with modular shipping, dividing large loads into smaller vessels capable of shallower drafts. Digital tracking systems reroute cargo dynamically, calculating cost versus delay in real time. Ports from Houston to Rotterdam adjust schedules based on Panama's daily reports. The global network flexes but creaks. For Panama itself, the crisis carries mixed lessons. On one hand, it highlights the canal's indispensable status, proof that even weakened, it commands global attention. On the other, it exposes dependence on a single vulnerable artery. Some Panamanian policymakers propose diversifying the economy away from toll revenues, investing in renewable energy exports or data transit systems. But replacing the canal's economic magnetism is a long project in a region accustomed to immediacy. Internationally, the drought underscores a broader theme. Climate and commerce are no longer separate conversations. The same atmospheric changes that melt Arctic ice and amplify typhoons are now constricting the canal carved through a rainforest. Geography, once humanity's stable foundation for trade, has become fluid again, its rules rewritten by rising heat. By mid-2025, rains return moderately, refilling lakes enough for cautious optimism. The canal resumes higher capacity, though not full speed. Authority officials declare almost proudly that there's plenty of water now, but the phrase sounds more like relief than confidence. Bulker transit numbers remain far below historical averages, and shippers plan diversions months in advance. No one trusts the weather anymore. At night, Gatun's surface glows under port lights, a still mirror reflecting cranes and starlight. The silence feels temporary, balanced between recovery and relapse. If climate volatility continues, Panama may join the ranks of semi-seasonal trade routes, reliable only at nature's discretion. In global terms, that's a quiet catastrophe. Because even if rainfall returns, the warning stands. When a waterway essential to both hemispheres starts to thirst, every connected economy feels it. And if Panama is drying, the world looks north, toward a different frontier, where the ice that once guarded the planet is vanishing faster than anyone expected. The Arctic Sea routes, the new great game. At first glance, the Arctic seems endless, ice, sky, and silence. But listen closer, and you'll hear the hum of engines among drifting flows. Cargo vessels now cross waters that stayed frozen for all of human history. The melting ice that terrifies climatologists has become an invitation for traders and governments. For the first time, ships can travel between Europe and Asia through routes that slice thousands of miles off traditional passages. These are the Arctic Sea routes, an emerging frontier where opportunity and danger coexist in equal measure. The change began gradually. Satellite records show that summer sea ice has shrunk by nearly half since the late 197s. The once impenetrable Northwest Passage through Canada and the Northern Sea route along Russia's coast now open longer each year. In 2024, Arctic shipping traffic reached record highs, over 3,000 voyages, a figure unthinkable a decade earlier. By 2025, some tankers began operating even in late autumn, escorted by icebreakers through thinning flows. The environmental alarm sounds alongside a geopolitical one. Whoever controls these new corridors controls a faster connection between continents. The allure is simple math. A voyage from Shanghai to Rotterdam takes about 22 days through the Suez Canal, but only 15 across the top of the world when conditions allow. Fuel savings offset the cost of ice navigation. For bulk cargo and energy shipments, each day saved means millions retained. That efficiency lures shipping firms despite extreme risks, rapid weather changes, limited rescue capacity, and the possibility of sudden refreezing that can trap vessels hundreds of miles from help. Every Arctic crossing remains part expedition, part gamble. No country has pursued this transformation more aggressively than Russia. Nearly the entire Northern Sea route hugs its coastline, giving Moscow both logistical control and military leverage. The Kremlin calls it a national transport artery, investing billions in new icebreakers, satellite systems, and ports stretching from Murmansk to Vladivostok. Armed installations now dot the region, runways for interceptor jets, radar domes, missile batteries. Officially, the buildup supports navigation safety. In practice, it projects power across a frontier newly valuable to global trade. The Arctic has become another theater for strategic posturing. Russia's ambitions intersect with climate realities. The state-run company Rosatomflot operates the world's largest nuclear-powered icebreaker fleet. capable of clearing 20-meter widths through meter-thick ice. Its escorts enable summer convoys carrying liquefied natural gas from Yamal Peninsula projects to Asian buyers. These Arctic energy exports bypass congested southern chokepoints like Hormuz or Suez, appealing to markets seeking security from Middle Eastern volatility. Yet every voyage relies on melting that exacerbates the very instability making it attractive. The paradox defines the era, a profit made from decay. China, though lacking Arctic coastline, calls itself a near-Arctic state. It's invested in research stations in Norway and Iceland, secured joint mining rights in Greenland, and partnered with Russia on LNG terminals. Its vision of a polar Silk Road extends the Belt and Road Initiative into waters once dismissed as unreachable. The language of cooperation masks strategic intent, access to alternative routes that reduce dependence on U.S. patrolled canals and straits. In Beijing's view, the Arctic offers both opportunity and escape from constraint. Meanwhile, Arctic nations, Norway, Canada, Denmark via Greenland, and the United States grapple with governance. Old treaties didn't predict the region's accessibility. Maritime boundaries blur as ice retreats, exposing seabeds rich in resources, oil, gas, rare minerals. Claims overlap. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea allows nations to extend territorial claims if they prove geological continuity from continental shelves. Each year brings new submissions, new disputes, and quiet anxiety. The world's newest trade lanes lie atop the world's oldest argument: who owns the frontier? NATO views the militarization with growing concern. Patrol flights from Alaska to northern Norway have increased. American and British submarines resurface periodically in polar waters, symbolic reminders of presence. Yet all sides insist the Arctic must remain a zone of peace. The contradiction persists: more weapons, more surveillance, more rhetoric about cooperation. It's a familiar pattern playing out against a frozen backdrop that melts faster each season. Beyond politics lies the physical challenge. Navigation here means threading through ice charts that change hourly. Temperatures swing brutally, fog forms without warning. Communications satellites operate at poor angles near the poles, leaving coverage gaps. Search and rescue infrastructure barely exists, just a handful of airstrips and stations scattered across thousands of kilometers. One hull breach or engine failure could become catastrophe before assistance arrives. Every vessel captain signs not only contract papers, but contingency plans that read like survival manuals. Still, the incentives multiply. As sea ice thins, natural gas fields, fisheries, and minerals once unreachable beckon investors. Arctic shipping companies advertise eco-routes, claiming fewer emissions due to shorter distances, though the irony isn't lost on environmental groups. Each additional crossing accelerates warming by releasing black carbon soot that darkens ice, making it melt even faster. The feedback loop is merciless, commerce powered by the very destruction it worsens. Local communities live in its shadow. Indigenous groups across Alaska, Canada, and Russia witness transformations that textbooks can't fully capture. Traditional hunting grounds turn to open water, permafrost villages sink as foundations thaw. Shipping traffic disrupts whale migration and contaminates fragile ecosystems with noise and fuel residue. Economic benefits, temporary jobs, port contracts, barely offset cultural and environmental upheaval. For them, the so-called Great Game feels more like intrusion than progress. Meanwhile, European energy strategy quietly adjusts. As Russian exports face sanctions, Arctic LNG projects offer loopholes routed through neutral partners. Ice-class carriers load cargo bound for transshipment hubs in Asia or Europe, blurring accountability. The geography gives Russia diplomatic leverage. Even under restriction, it can promise access others cannot control. Global sanctions and climate goals collide against the timeless rule of geography. Whoever holds the passage determines the pace of trade. Insurance companies now treat Arctic routes as frontier risk. Premiums triple compared to Suez itineraries. Operators must document ice forecasts, crew training, and emergency response capability before coverage applies. These costs slow expansion but can't stop curiosity. In 2025, a consortium of Scandinavian firms tested container service between Busan, South Korea, and Kirkenes, Norway. The voyage cut transit time by a week and reported only minimal ice interference. Investors called it proof of viability. Environmentalists called it a warning made tangible. Both were right. The drama extends west toward North America, where the Northwest Passage still challenges navigation more than its Eurasian twin. Canada insists the route runs through internal waters. The United States and others call it an international strait. As warming erodes barriers, this legal dispute gains urgency. For now, heavy ice and inadequate mapping keep traffic limited. Adventurous tourist cruises, occasional research vessels, rare cargo experiments. But every melted summer expands ambition. The day it becomes routinely navigable, sovereignty assertions will clash like the meeting of two seas. The new contest resembles the 19th century scramble for colonies, except this time the prize is accessibility itself. Instead of planting flags on land, powers stake routes through water. Where explorers once sought the pole out of curiosity, corporations now seek it for efficiency. The term resource race feels too narrow. This is a logistics race, measured not by territory but transit time. As global shipping recalibrates, the potential shift is enormous. If Arctic crossings become regular, they could siphon traffic from the Suez and Malacca, redistributing influence among hemispheres. Europe would see faster access to Asian markets, altering supply chain geography. But reliability remains low. A sudden freeze can erase schedules overnight. In trade modeling, unpredictability equals cost. The Arctic remains both shortcut and snare. Climate science frames it starkly. Each year of viable navigation means another step toward irreversible warming. Yet momentum persists. Governments fund research stations. Companies order ice-reinforced hulls. The line between exploitation and adaptation blurs in the heat radiating from an ever-brighter polar sun. At dusk, the scene borders on the surreal, ice floes tinted pink, a freighter cutting through meltwater under an orange horizon. Fog swallows its wake, silence returns, broken only by cracking ice. It's the sound of a new era forming, not discovery, not conquest, but dependence drawn ever farther north. The Arctic once protected itself with cold. Now the shield is gone. Trade flows where glaciers retreat, and the frontier of globalization has reached the edge of the map. Power follows the thaw, and the nations racing for position see both profit and peril shimmering on the horizon. 7 places warn of the same truth, but none so clearly as here, where the planet's warning lights glow brightest against the lingering ice. The domino effect: when one closes, all slow. Trade depends on rhythm, ships departing, arriving, refueling, repeating. But in 2025, that rhythm sounds different. Somewhere in the world, one corridor always strains. Drought halts Panama, conflict delays the Red Sea, piracy slows Malacca. Each disruption sends pressure downstream, compressing margins until another chokepoint cracks. These aren't isolated crises, they're dominoes laid edge to edge. Think of a single ship delayed in Suez. Containers meant for European factories arrive late, reducing export schedules. Empty vessels then miss Panama booking slots for the return trip, where drought already limits passage. Stranded freighters detour around Africa, increasing arrival congestion in Singapore. That crowding stretches crew rotations, exhausts harbors, raises accident probability. Every adjustment elsewhere magnifies the next. Markets notice instantly. When Panama restricted transit in late 2024, freight prices through the Suez route rose 10% simply because shippers anticipated diversion. Insurance companies calculated that any obstruction at one canal meant higher exposure at all others. It's numerical panic disguised as foresight. The global system doesn't just connect trade, it synchronizes anxiety. Ships themselves absorb that tension. Captains describe schedules that no longer align. A tanker leaving the Gulf under one contract arrives in Asia under another's delay penalties. Port operators juggle empty containers like mismatched puzzle pieces. Even minor setbacks require rewiring entire chains built for linear motion. The closer the world gets to efficiency, the less slack it keeps to absorb failure. During the Red Sea attacks, carriers packed 2 seasons of cargo into one routing quarter to avoid risk zones. By June, Malacca was overwhelmed. Shipping coordination software flagged overlapping arrivals faster than ports could clear berths. A single loading crane malfunction in Singapore backed up vessels across the South China Sea. The mechanics of congestion now resemble an equation too large to solve, solved daily by improvisation. At finance desks far from the sea, the numbers morph into price curves. Commodity traders hedge against delays, pushing futures up before the delays even materialize. Airlines preemptively buy fuel reserves. Retailers inflate inventories. Consumers feel it last, when food and electronics edge higher, unaware their cost was set by weather in Panama or political speeches near Hormuz. This chain reaction defines modern vulnerability. In the 20th century, disruptions stayed local. Warehouses and multiple suppliers provided buffers. Globalization erased those pauses. Just-in-time manufacturing turned time itself into profit. Now every industry runs synchronized by the perfect assumption that nothing will go wrong anywhere. When something does, the shock isn't confined, it echoes through balance sheets and ocean currents alike. Engineers call this coupling, but it behaves more like contagion. Rerouting 1% of world trade from Suez to the Cape of Good Hope sounds minor until thousands of ships compete for scarce refueling ports, squeezing local fuel markets and driving costs upward. Those costs then reflect in agricultural shipments, which raise food prices and political tensions in importing countries. What begins as obstacle becomes policy crisis. In early 2025, some logistics observers ran a simulation. Simultaneous partial closures of Panama and Hormuz would reduce global shipping efficiency by nearly 40%. That doesn't mean 40% of goods vanish, only that they arrive unpredictably, a delay measured in inflation. Supply chains survived disruption poorly because they were never designed for coexistence with chaos. Efficiency punished redundancy, and redundancy is what resilience requires. This fragility extends to digital systems too. Port operations, satellite tracking, and customs logistics rely on energy-intensive data centers linked by undersea cables that follow the same trade routes. A conflict near Taiwan that cuts communications would complicate navigation in entirely different oceans. The physical bottleneck doubles as a cyber one. Data can jam as easily as ships. Inside corporate planning rooms, the acknowledgement spreads slowly. Risk isn't compartmentalized. Executives once asked, "What if our suppliers fail?" Now they ask, "What if the ocean stops working?" Some respond by overbuying storage capacity inland. Others explore regional manufacturing, trading distance savings for stability. Yet all depend, ultimately, on the same maritime arteries, meaning diversification. A shore can't bypass geography at sea. The feedback loop runs both directions. When Panama's drought escalated, U.S. grain exporters rerouted shipments through Gulf ports toward Europe instead of Asia. That migration burdened Atlantic shipping, raising fuel consumption that fed the very climate pressures drying Panama in the first place. Cause and consequence began trading places, climate-altering trade, trade amplifying climate. Even insurance, once a buffer, becomes amplifier. Each crisis inflates premiums until smaller operators withdraw, consolidating flows into fewer megacarriers. Fewer carriers mean fewer points of failure, but larger impact when one stalls. Its resilience quantified by market share. Economists describe it politely as systemic tightness. Sailors describe it differently: traffic everywhere, margin nowhere. Humans built this lattice of dependence thinking coordination equaled control. But connection is indifferent to intention. The same fiber lines, fuel chains, and tide tables that make prosperity scalable also make catastrophe shared. When one route falters, others strain not out of choice, but arithmetic. Researchers mapping delays visualize it like circulatory stress. Close one artery, blood speeds through the next until pressure bursts the weakest capillary. That's global trade now, a living organism operating near hypertensive collapse. Perhaps resilience means accepting slower flow, more routes, deliberate inefficiency. Yet economies trained for speed resist slowing down, even to survive. For now, the network hums unevenly. Ships linger off anchorages, convoys build, schedules slip. Ports issue daily bulletins phrased in measured calm, but laced with urgency. Beneath each update lies a truth both simple and unsettling. When one passage narrows, the whole world holds its breath. The age of fragility, lessons in overdependence. History always treated progress as a straight line: faster ships, cheaper transport, tighter coordination. But behind that speed hides a blind spot. The world's supply system evolved to prize efficiency above endurance. Every factory that trimmed excess inventory, every shipping route optimized for cost, removed a layer of resilience. What began as triumph over distance quietly became a gamble against time. In the relentless pursuit of smoothness, redundancy was written off as waste. Warehouses emptied because storage costs money. Alternate suppliers faded because singular contracts saved cents per unit. Ports engineered for peak capacity ran permanently at capacity, leaving nothing to absorb surprise. For decades, the system rewarded precision until precision met chaos. It took only one ship stuck in Suez, one drought in Panama, one drone in the Red Sea for the illusion to crumble. The lesson wasn't that disruption is new, but that endurance was sold off years ago. We swapped buffers for spreadsheets, assuming technology would fill the gap. It did until nature, politics, and physics refused to cooperate. This is the age of fragility, defined not by collapse, but by constant near miss. Each crisis exposes how perfectly balanced the structure has become and how easily that balance tips. Economists call it interdependence. Sailors call it luck, but luck is no strategy. Look back at globalization's origins. The 20th century built a web connecting continents with cables, contracts, and confidence. It thrived on stable climate and predictable politics, both now eroding. Factories depend on minerals mined oceans away, powered by energy that crosses contested straits, delivered by ships that burn the very fuel now destabilizing the climate supporting them. Feedback loops multiply faster than innovation can offset. Efficiency, once celebrated, now resembles overconfidence. Just-in-time, logistics morphed into barely-in-time survival. A typhoon, a strike, or a cyber-attack anywhere cascades everywhere. The more interconnected the world becomes, the tighter the coupling between profit and peril. The concept of local crisis no longer applies. In boardrooms, adaptation sounds visionary. In practice, it's improvisation. Companies diversify suppliers, but new plants still rely on the same straits, canals, and digital lines. Governments form task forces on supply chain resilience, yet policy shifts lag behind climate shifts. The timelines don't match. It takes months to reroute a fleet, decades to rebuild a system. War, drought, temperature extremes, different origins, identical outcome, constraint. Energy shortages raise fertilizer prices that affect food supply, which increases political tension that heightens military risk and feeds back into fuel demand. The loop closes, feeding itself through geography we once thought conquered. Some analysts argue the answer lies in regionalization, bringing production closer to consumption. Yet proximity doesn't guarantee security. Europe learned that when drought cut its own river transport, just as Panama faltered. China faces internal heat waves that dry the very canals linking its manufacturing zones. Compact systems still depend on conditions beyond control. True resilience might look counterintuitive: slower trade, more storage, smaller ships, shorter contracts. It means designing for interruption rather than perfection, but such redesign clashes with an economy judged quarter by quarter. A world addicted to acceleration rarely volunteers to decelerate. Climate amplifies the dilemma. Melting Arctic ice opens shortcuts even as it destabilizes weather everywhere else. Rising seas threaten ports built for static coastlines. Each adaptation spawns new exposure. The search for efficiency continues, mapped onto a planet losing equilibrium. The system's weakness isn't its ambition, but its assumption that improvement has no limit. Culturally, fragility feels alien because stability became background noise for generations. We built social trust on the expectation that shelves would stay stocked, lights would stay on, and prices would stay predictable. Beneath that trust ran a web of canals and corridors never designed for simultaneous stress. Their smooth operation fostered the illusion of mastery. Now cracks show through the numbers. Insurance sectors warn of non-linear risk, events compounding faster than models. Financial institutions embed climate metrics into interest rates. Every policy revision quietly acknowledges uncertainty as the new constant. What once kept globalization invisible now demands daily management. And yet there's a strange optimism buried inside this reckoning. Recognition is the prerequisite for change. The fragility we face is not final, it's diagnostic. It shows exactly where complacency holds. Each choke point, each failure, outlines where humanity pushed too far and where correction is possible. The question is not whether failure can be avoided, but whether it can be contained. If the 20th century measured success by speed, perhaps the 21st will measure survival by slack, the room to breathe, to pause, to absorb shock without snapping. Resilience isn't opposing globalization, it's redefining it, grounding trade not in maximum throughput, but in sustainable rhythm. Because efficiency made the world rich, but it also made it brittle. And unless that balance shifts, the next storm or standoff won't just delay shipments, it will rewrite the boundaries of what civilization can manage. So what happens if nothing changes, if these choke points keep tightening, if adaptation remains rhetoric, if geography's warning is ignored? The answer waits in a future already rehearsing its lines, one crisis at a time. The world at the breaking point. Picture this: tankers rerouted from Hormuz wander in search of alternative fuel stops. Panama locks close early, leaving convoys stranded. Piracy flares again in Malacca. Arctic fog delays the very ships meant to bypass the lower latitudes. It's not one event, but many simultaneous stress points striking the same fragile network. The year could be 203, or it could be next week. The difference is timing, not possibility. The modern world runs on coincidence, assuming that all critical routes can't fail at once. But what if they do? Start with Taiwan. An unplanned confrontation in the Strait halts container traffic for just 48 hours. Insurance companies classify the zone as war risk. Ships divert south to the Philippine Sea, adding days. Electronics inventories fall, production lines stall. At the same time, escalating rhetoric in the Persian Gulf spooks oil traders. An unconfirmed missile launch pushes crude above $120 per barrel overnight. Aviation fuel prices rise. Shipping surcharges compound. Those higher costs hit agriculture. Grain exporters delay schedules, then reroute through Cape Horn because drought renders Panama unreliable. Delivery to Asia takes 2 weeks longer, and food markets adjust instantly. Prices climb before shipments even arrive. Protests over cost of living spread in import-dependent nations. Meanwhile, Europe's factories, short of components from Taiwan, idle energy use, shrinking electricity demand. Natural gas producers respond by cutting output, destabilizing their own contracts. The global economy begins oscillating, one correction begetting another. Diplomats scramble for calm, but shipping runs on physics, not policy. Ports back up faster than negotiations move. Satellite communication networks jam under cyber interference, targeting logistics systems. Customs databases lag. Insurance claims flood in for undelivered goods. Within days, freight indexes plummet like stock tickers after a crash. And yet the vessels are still out at sea, caught in a kind of mechanical inertia. Even when trading halts, ships can't teleport away from risk. Crews drift through war zones, uncertain if harbors remain open. A captain leaving the Red Sea might discover his destination declared no entry mid-voyage. Fuel reserves grow finite. Engines idle at anchor. It's paralysis that looks like motion, the world still turning, but directionless. In this scenario, governments intervene but not coherently. Each state prioritizes home territory. Strategic reserves release oil meant to calm markets, yet transport bottlenecks prevent its quick distribution. Emergency summits promise cooperation, but rival powers frame the crisis through blame. China blames Western containment. The US cites authoritarian brinkmanship. Europe calls for neutrality it can't afford. The map fractures not by ideology, but by logistics. Within weeks, inflation rockets. Air freight capacity disappears as jet fuel doubles in price. Supermarkets ration imported produce. Energy-poor nations experience rolling blackouts. Businesses reliant on just-in-time delivery collapse, cascading layoffs through service economies. Globalization doesn't combust, it clogs. At sea, desperation draws improvisation. Militaries escort civilian convoys reminiscent of wartime practices. Makeshift alliances form between competitors. Singapore coordinates emergency patrols. Egypt extends Suez operating hours despite maintenance strain. Russia touts its Arctic passage as salvation. Each solution creates new risk. Overcrowded polar routes encounter early freeze. Accidents spill oil into fragile waters. Salvage fleets can't respond fast enough. Financial systems mirror the chaos. Currencies tethered to trade volumes, the Korean won, the Singapore dollar, the euro, swing violently. Hedge funds bet against recovery. Governments impose capital controls. Ordinary citizens feel the shock as their savings lose value faster than wages adapt. The trust that underpins markets dissolves. By mid-crisis, negotiation finally cools tensions near Taiwan, but the damage is baked in. Ship queues stretch across oceans like metallic deserts. It takes months to realign schedules, years to rebuild confidence. The aftermath isn't dramatic collapse, it's exhaustion. Economies restart slower, more cautious. People begin questioning how a few narrow passages held such disproportionate power. Energy experts call it the multi-chokepoint event. Economists label it systemic interaction. Sailors describe it more simply, the year the ocean stopped being reliable. Would recovery come? Probably. Trade reroutes, technology innovates, markets reprice, but political consequences linger. Nations reassess dependence. Regional blocs grow insular. Instead of a global market, clusters form: Pacific, Atlantic, Arctic, each defending its own routes. This is how fragmentation begins, not in ideology, but in infrastructure. If simultaneous disruption sounds far-fetched, remember how often near misses occur already. In 2024 alone, Panama's drought cut transits nearly in half, Red Sea attacks diverted thousands of ships, and Arctic traffic set records simultaneously. The puzzle pieces for collapse are already on the board, only alignment is missing. The deeper threat isn't conflict or climate alone, but their combination feeding unpredictability faster than systems can adjust. One incident reshapes weather derivatives, another alters diplomacy, another reshuffles trade. Complexity multiplies until even predicting consequence becomes futile. This is the breaking point, not apocalyptic explosion, but saturation. Every link tugged to its limit until nothing responds as intended. No villain, no singular event, just accumulated strain manifesting everywhere at once. And through it all, daily life continues, deliveries delayed, energy bills swelling, markets twitching. Civilization doesn't end. It simply runs slower, less coordinated, more fragile. The luxury of assuming continuity disappears. History would record it as transition, the moment humans recognized interdependence as vulnerability. A world built on 7 fragile corridors would confront its own design flaw. And as governments rebuild, they'd have to decide whether efficiency remains worth the risk, that every shortcut brings the system closer to standstill. Because at that juncture, geography ceases to be background and becomes destiny again. Oceans once meant freedom of movement, now they signify conditional access. Every trade route doubles as pressure gauge, every shipping forecast as political weather report. The map of the future may not be redrawn by conquest or discovery, but by congestion. Borders might remain intact, while the flow between them changes forever. Nations won't expand, they'll contract into the routes still open to them. And lurking behind that potential is a quieter realization. Our civilization's heartbeat, steady, mechanical, maritime, has skipped enough beats already. Because the map of crisis is already drawn, it's waiting, patient, for the first line to break. Fragility revealed. The engines of globalization hum through 7 passages, the narrow straits and canals that connect continents. Each one tells a version of the same story, prosperity balanced on geography's edge. Taiwan's tension, Hormuz's volatility, Red Sea's peril, Suez's precision, Malacca's density, Panama's thirst, and the Arctic's thaw, different symptoms of one condition: dependence without margin. Our species built its wealth on routes meant to shorten distance, then forgot that distance was also protection. By erasing space, we erased flexibility. Every shortcut became a single point of failure, visible now in every climate chart and shipping forecast. The planet didn't plot against us, we engineered fragility into its veins. What happens next isn't predetermined. A system this intricate can adapt as easily as it breaks if we choose to redesign rather than react. Resilience begins not with new technology, but with perspective, seeing risk as cumulative, not isolated. It means planning for slower trade, redundant storage, diversified routes, and maybe accepting that speed isn't synonymous with progress. Each choke point warns in its own language. The drought whispers scarcity, the blockade shouts brinkmanship, the ice melt murmurs inevitability. Together, they translate into one message: balance must return. Because the modern world runs on geography it barely understands, and understanding fragility is the first step towards surviving it before one choke point becomes one too many. If you want to see how nations are trying to rewire that balance, watch the next story on global trade adaptation. Subscribe to stay ahead of the shifting map while the sea still carries our future.